Okay, that time of year, it's time to prepare for the final exam in both 110 and 201 here for these two test levels. So if you are in MuseX 175, you're going to be taking the Pro Tools 110 test. So this is different than tests you might have taken in previous terms. And if you are in the 270 class, then you're going to be taking the 201 level test. The first thing that I wanted to bring up, and I went over this at the beginning of the year, and it might have been a little bit esoteric. And this is easier to teach on a Mac. And the other thing that is kind of unfair, perhaps, for Pro Tools users on PCs is some of the test questions, they will just throw at you the Mac commands. So generally, organize these keys into these particular functions. If you ever get a question that says, how do you extend a selection? Or how do you select from the cursor to the beginning of the session? Anytime you have a test question that has selection in it, what it means is you are going to need to use the shift key in that particular key command. These test questions are sort of like a game of Simon Says. If you could just remember to always be very, very leery of reading the question. So if it ever says, how do you extend a selection? Or how do you select from this place to this place? It doesn't matter what the question is. You can eliminate different test answers based on whether it has shift in there or not. Control, I don't believe there's any test questions that relate to this on this exam, but speaking strictly in terms of Mac key commands, control is used for snap to commands. So in other words, how can I snap the beginning of a clip to a certain location? Or how can I snap the end of a clip to a certain location? These are called alignment or snap to commands. I didn't see any alignment questions on the exam, but just know that it's there. Then the other thing that I want to talk about and why this is easier to explain on a Mac than it is on a PC is you could sort of organize it based on the way that the keys are organized on the keyboard. So the pro tip here is the keys on the left side of a cluster tend to deal with the beginning of the session or the beginning of a clip. And the keys on the right side of a cluster tend to deal with the end. So this isn't always true, but it is particularly when you are dealing with stuff on a Mac. So the assumption here, and it's a big assumption, I understand that, is that most people are right-handed, so you'll be using the mouse with your right hand. So then you would be using the modifier keys with your left hand. So if that is true, it organizes out as shift is up here on top, then you have control below it, then you have option, the option key or the alt key in PC land, and then you have the command key over here on the right side. So what that would mean is if you ever get a question that says, how do you deal with something that relates to the beginning? Most of the time, it's going to relate to the option key. And how do you deal with something that relates, like how do you extend the end of a selection by the amount of the nudge value? Then the answer would be, because I said selection, shift would be in there. And then the end, it would have the command key. So this is going to be completely different on a PC. So let's say I wanted to extend my selection. Let's say my selection is right here. Let's say I wanted to extend it to the beginning of the session. What I would do is I would hold down shift, and then to get to the beginning of the session, to navigate to the beginning of the session, you would hit the return key. And then if I hit shift and then return, it takes me to the beginning of the session. Say I wanted to extend the end of my selection by the amount of the nudge value. Remember that the end relates to the command key. The selection relates to the shift key. So if I hold down shift command and then I hit the plus key, I hit the shift command and then the plus key, it's going to extend the end of my selection. If it is extending the beginning of my selection, I would hit Shift Option and then hit the minus key or the plus key. So Shift deals with selection, Option deals with the beginning, Command deals with the end. Let's say it says, how do you extend the end of a clip by the amount of the nudge value? Let's say I have a clip that is this long here. So let's say, so my nudge value here is 1 second. Let's say I wanted to make the end of the clip longer by 1 second. So again, it says, let's say the test question says, how do you extend the end of a clip? I would hold down the Command key, and then I hit the plus key or the minus key, and then it will make the end of the selection bigger or smaller. If I had Option, plus or minus, then Option deals with the beginning. So it is going to, or it'll make the beginning of the clip shorter or longer. Okay. So the other thing that Option does is Option reverses a function. So let's say I'm using my trimmer tool here and I'm trimming off the edge of it. It'll usually just trim off the beginning until you get to the middle of the clip, and then it'll switch it the other way. But let's say I wanted to, and it trims in the direction that it's facing. But let's say I wanted to trim off the end of the clip and just leave this very beginning snare drum hit here. Option will reverse the function of something. So in other words, if I wanted to reverse the direction of my trim tool, I could hold down the Option key and it would do it. Or if, let's say, I got a test question, which is a test question, where it says, how do I select to the beginning of the session? So I'm going to zoom out here, really far here. So I'm right here, sort of at the beginning of this clip. So if I hit Shift for selection and then hit Return, it will take me to the beginning of the session, of course. But what if it says, how do you select to the end of a session? You can hit Shift Option and Return, and it would be the opposite of going to the beginning. And then it takes me to the end. So it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but sometimes you have to think about things like that. When we were in Mac-only labs, it's easier to remember. Unfortunately, when you're thinking about this in terms of a PC, it gets a little bit more difficult. Sorry, I don't have a better picture of a PC keyboard, but Shift is still your selection modifier. Your Snap to modifier key or your alignment key is this Start or Windows key. And then your Alt key deals with the beginning when we're thinking about things in terms of editorial, or it will reverse stuff. And then Control is the one that deals with the end. So I sort of lose this thing at the over here on the right side, where the keys on the left side tend to deal with the beginning and keys on the right side tend to deal with the end. So you're sort of on your own and you have to memorize stuff when it comes to PCs. Understanding navigation is also important for the tests. So P goes up. If you hit the P key, it will take your cursor up. When you hit the colon key, it's going to move the cursor down. You can hit L, and that will take you to the previous clip border or to the previous transient if you have tab to transients on. Or you can hit quote, and it'll take you over to the right side. This, we can sort of combine this with the other stuff that we had learned as well. This could relate to selections, for instance. So also, again, the things that are on the right side deal with the end of something. The things that are on the left side deal with the beginning. If I have this selection, if I have a selection like here, say I have multiple tracks, and I wanted to extend my selection upwards, I can hold down Shift, and then I can hit the P key, and it will extend my selection upwards. If I hit Shift and colon, it will take me downwards. If I want to extend my selection to the next clipboard or to the next transient, depending on whether tab to transients is on or not, let's say it's right here, and I want to extend it to that next drum beat here. I can hit Shift and Tab, and it will extend my selection to the next transient. So how do I extend the beginning of my selection to the previous transient? I can hit Shift, Option, Tab, and it will take me to the previous transient. But let's say I have it selected like this. If I hit Shift, Option, Tab, it will extend the beginning to the previous transient. If I want to extend the end of it to the next transient, I can hit Shift, Command, plus or minus, and it would extend the end. Tab isn't going to work. But if I did hit Shift, Tab, it would extend my selection to the next transient. So if you understand these modifier keys, it helps a lot. This here is the Tab to Transients key. I put this in the PowerPoint, so I'm guessing there is a test question that's associated with it. It's right underneath your tools. Looks like a little arrow, and then the arrow is pointed towards a transient here. So you can nudge to the left using the minus key, or nudge to the right using the plus key over here on the keypad. So how do you make a selection to the beginning of the session? Well, the answer with that one is you would hold down the Shift key because it says selection in the test question, and then you just hit return and it takes you to the beginning of the session. How do you make a selection to the end of the session? Hold down Shift, Option or Alt to reverse it, and then hit return, and it will select to the end of the session. How do you extend the end of a selection by the amount of the nudge value? So it says selection in there. So you'd hit Shift and Command on a Mac or Control on a PC. That's kind of confusing, but so Shift, Command, and then you would hit the plus or minus key. So they give you the plus or minus key in the test questions. Extend the beginning of a selection by the amount of the nudge value. So you would hold down Shift and Option, plus or minus, and then it would do that. And then how do you extend the end of a clip by the nudge value? So this is tricky. So you would extend the end of a clip. It does not have selection in there, so that's the sucker move there. So the end of a clip, so you just hit Command and then plus or minus, and it would extend that. Or if you're on a PC, Control plus or minus. How would you extend a selection to the previous clip border? You would hit Shift, Option, and Tab.